The cold steel of the USS Concorde's command bridge vibrated beneath Lieutenant Commander Aiden Cross's boots as the ship drifted silently through the void of space. The stars outside, brilliant and distant, seemed almost mocking. Here he was, on the eve of a war humanity might not survive, and all the galaxy could think about were Earth's so-called obsolete warships. Aiden's gaze swept over the bridge, his crew working in synchronized precision, but he could feel the weight of their skepticism. The Concorde was old even by human standards. Built decades ago, when Earth was still learning to crawl among the stars, it had seen countless upgrades, but it was still the same warship humanity had once been ashamed of. The Concorde was a relic, outdated, irrelevant, just as the galaxy had always viewed Earth. Yet here they were, humanity's last hope. Earth's fleet, cobbled together from the forgotten ships of war, now represented the only resistance to the growing threat of the Xenthari Empire. A ruthless, expansionist species that had crushed the mighty kingdoms of the Elgari and the Sarians, two of the most advanced empires in the galaxy. The Xenthari had invaded Earth once before, but they hadn't anticipated the human spirit. That spirit had only grown stronger. But as Aiden stared at the tactical display, he couldn't shake the doubt in his chest. Their fleet was small, far smaller than the might of the galactic powers that had written off Earth as irrelevant. Their weapons, aging, their armor, worn. But there was one thing the galaxy still didn't understand about humans. They fought differently. They didn't need the most advanced technology. They had something far more dangerous: resilience. "Commander." A voice pulled him from his thoughts. It was Ensign Emily Drake, her eyes still wide with the tension that gripped the ship. "We're nearing the Xenthari front lines. Their fleet's been sighted in the Altair system, and they're overwhelming." "Sir, are we really going through with this?" Aiden turned to face her, his jaw tightening. There was fear in her voice, but there was also something else. Curiosity. A flicker of belief that she wasn't sure was wise to express aloud. Aiden looked back at her. He paused for a moment, knowing that the weight of this decision was too heavy for one person to carry, but it had fallen on his shoulders. "Yes, Ensign, we are. This is humanity's fight. It's not about the ships, or the weapons, or the tech. It's about us, our will to survive, and no matter how big their fleet is, we're going to make them regret underestimating us." Drake hesitated, looking down at the tactical readout before her, but there was a small nod of agreement. Aiden saw the spark in her eyes, the same spark that had been burning in humans since the first steps on the moon. They wouldn't go down without a fight. She tapped. The comm system crackled. "Commander Cross, we're receiving a transmission from Admiral Rohr of the Xenthari fleet. He demands your surrender. He states that Earth's resistance is futile." Aiden's lips curled into a wry smile. "Put him through." The holographic image of Admiral Rohr shimmered into view. The Xenthari were tall, their skin a dark shade of violet, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly intelligence. He exuded confidence, arrogance.
"Commander Cross," Rohr's voice boomed. "I am Admiral Cross of the Xenthari fleet. You stand before an army that has conquered entire star systems. Your so-called fleet is nothing but junk, held together by outdated technology. You cannot win this war. Surrender now, and I may show you mercy. You cannot fight your inevitable extinction."
The words stung, but Aiden did not flinch. His heart was pounding, adrenaline coursing through his veins. "Admiral Rohr," Aiden said, his voice calm but unwavering, "your confidence blinds you. You mistake age for weakness. Your fleet might be vast, but it is not invincible. Humanity doesn't bow to threats, not to you, not to anyone." Rohr's expression darkened.
"Then prepare for the annihilation of your race, Commander. I will be the one to watch your pathetic fleet burn."
The transmission cut out. Aiden exhaled slowly. The weight of the decision had just become more real. It was no longer a matter of theory or strategy. They had been warned. The Xenthari would come for them, and they would strike hard. "Prepare the fleet," Aiden said, his voice now hard and commanding. "We fight, and we win. This is humanity's moment to show the galaxy who we really are." Enjoying this chapter? Don't forget to like and subscribe to HFY Genesis for more epic tales. Aiden turned toward the bridge viewport, his fingers lightly tapping on the control panel as he stared into the endless night. His thoughts were a mixture of determination and uncertainty. Was this the moment humanity had been waiting for? Or would it be their final stand? He couldn't afford to doubt now. "Full speed ahead, Ensign. Set course for the Altair system." The ship's engines hummed to life, and the Concorde, along with the fleet behind it, pushed forward. Earth's greatest test was about to begin. If you were in Commander Cross's shoes, would you have stood firm against such overwhelming odds? Let us know in the comments below. The fleet had crossed into the Altai system, a vast expanse of stars and swirling dust clouds. Aiden stood at the bridge viewport, eyes scanning the horizon, searching for signs of the enemy. His heart raced, not from fear, but from the anticipation of the coming battle. He had led them this far. Now it was time to prove that humanity could stand against the overwhelming might of the Xenthari. "Admiral Rohr's fleet is in position," Ensign Drake reported from her console. Her fingers danced over the touchscreen, eyes glued to the shifting data streams. "They're not giving us any time to regroup. We'll be in range in less than 20 minutes. Aiden nodded, steeling himself. His crew was ready. But were they ready enough? Their fleet was still far smaller, far weaker than the Xenthari juggernaut. Earth's most powerful warships, some of them ancient, some of them cobbled together in desperation, now had to face a force that had decimated species far more advanced than humanity. "We have no choice," Aiden muttered to himself. "We fight. We fight because it's what we do. It's who we are." "Commander, we've picked up a signal from the Vanguard." Lieutenant Silva, the communications officer, called from across the room. "It's the Sovereign's flagship, the Gargantuan. They're signaling for reinforcements. I don't think they'll make it." The tension on the bridge tightened like a wire ready to snap. If the Sovereign, a flagship that had stood for over a century, was falling, there would be no reinforcements for the Conquered and her sisters. They would be alone. Aiden's eyes darkened. His hand moved over the command panel, sending orders to his fleet. "No reinforcements. We stay as we are. We hold the line. We fight with what we have. That's all we need." Sir." A voice from the back of the bridge interrupted his focus. "You really believe that, Commander?" It was Lieutenant Kiera Knox, the Concorde's chief tactical officer. Her tone was heavy with skepticism. Aiden turned to face her. She was young, younger than most officers, but she had proven herself time and time again in battle simulations. Her skill was undeniable, yet her doubt cut through the air like a blade. "What's the alternative, Kiera? Surrender? Watch them burn Earth without a shot fired? No. We fight." Kiera's face softened, the hard edge of doubt fading into a quiet respect. She nodded, but Aiden could see it in her eyes. The fear was still there. Not of losing, but of humanity losing something far more precious than a battle. The Conqueror's crew had learned how to fight from the pain of history. Humanity had been broken before, abandoned, left to languish on a small, insignificant planet. But they had rebuilt. They had risen, time and time again. And now, they would rise again. The Xenthari would see that. "Commander," it was Ensign Drake, her voice high with alarm. "Incoming." A warning flare lit up the tactical display. The Xenthari fleet had emerged from behind a gas giant, their massive ships filling the screen. The sheer size of their ships was staggering, cylindrical behemoths bristling with weapons. But Aiden had seen this before. The enemy relied on overwhelming firepower. They relied on intimidation. They didn't understand that humanity's greatest weapon was their ingenuity, their adaptability. This wasn't a fight they had planned for. "They're charging weapons!" Lieutenant Knox shouted, her hands flying over her console. "We're going to take fire in less than 2 minutes. Brace for impact," Aiden ordered. The command reverberated across the bridge, and the crew sprang into action. The atmosphere on the Concorde was taut, every crew member working in synchrony. Every decision mattered. Every second counted. And then the first volley hit. The ship shuddered under the barrage. Explosions reverberated through the hull as plasma bolts cracked against the Concorde's weakened shields. Red lights flashed, warning sirens blaring through the corridors. The entire ship seemed to groan under the assault. Carroll held out his hand, and Aiden held onto his chair, his knuckles white, but he didn't let the tension show. "Status report," Avi said. "Shields holding at 70%, Commander," Lieutenant Silva reported, her voice tight but steady. "Damage to the forward plating. We've lost one of the turrets." Aiden's mind raced. The Concorde could survive, but it would need every ounce of its strength. "Get us into position. Target their engines. All ships." "Concentrated fire." Another fire flare. The fleet obeyed in perfect unison. The ancient warships, each a relic from a different era of humanity's rise, moved as one. The Concorde surged forward, its engines straining against the pressure. The enemy might have size, but humanity had speed. It had adaptability. "We're in position," Kira called, her voice full of urgency. "Firing!" The Concorde's weapons erupted, beams of energy cutting through the dark. The first Xenthari ship exploded in a burst of brilliant blue, and the crew cheered. But that was only the beginning. The battle raged for hours. The Concorde and its fleet fought like wolves, using the agility of their older ships to outmaneuver the lumbering Xenthari warships. But the Xenthari were relentless, and the losses were mounting. The Sovereign's flagship had already fallen, and other human ships were being picked off, one by one. "We've lost the Vigilance," Ensign Drake reported. "Their hull's been breached. They're gone." Aiden's throat tightened. They couldn't keep losing ships like this. Every loss was a crack in the foundation of their resolve. But he couldn't let it show. He couldn't let the fear spread. "Hold the line," he shouted. "We're human. We don't give up." As the Concorde sped through the battle, Aiden felt something shift in the air. It wasn't just the clashing of ships or the burning of plasma. It was something deeper. A spark had ignited within him, and he could feel it spreading through the crew. A shared defiance, a shared will to survive. But the Xenthari were not so easily swayed. And now, as the battle reached its peak, Aiden knew this was only the beginning. The real fight had yet to come. Enjoying this chapter? Don't forget to like and subscribe to HFY Genesis for more epic tales. What would you have done if you were Commander Cross, facing overwhelming odds and the loss of so many ships? How far would you push humanity's fight for survival? Let us know in the comments. The battle had turned. Humanity had done the impossible, held the line. But at what cost? The Concorde's hull was a patchwork of burns, dents, and scarred metal. The energy shields flickered, their reserves nearly depleted. As the smoke cleared from the destruction, Aiden stood at the command center, staring out at the remnants of the battlefield. The Xenthari fleet had retreated, but the victory felt hollow. "We won, for now." Lieutenant Silva's voice broke through it. Aiden didn't respond immediately. A silence of the bridge hung heavy, as if the weight of their survival was too much to bear. "We need reinforcements. We can't fight another wave like that. Not with these ships. We've been through this already. We can't count on anyone but ourselves." Yet deep inside, he knew the truth. Earth's allies were scattered. No one had the strength, the will to help. Not anymore. But there was one possibility. We may not have reinforcements, Aiden began, the words slowly taking shape in his mind, but we have connections. Kira raised an eyebrow. You're not talking about the Xentharians, are you? Aiden met her gaze. The Xentharians, once humanity's allies, now living in exile after a political upheaval had torn their empire apart, were the key. Their ships, while outdated, were still. They had once been a part of the Galactic Council, before their empire collapsed in the wake of a betrayal that had shattered their power. Now they were a scattered species, unwilling to trust anyone. But if there was a chance, we need them, Aiden said. And we're going to make an alliance, no matter what it takes. The Xentharian fleet was located in the forgotten fringes of the galaxy, far from the bustling trade routes and the reach of the Xenthari Empire. The Concord and her fleet made their way toward their coordinates, a series of ancient stellar coordinates that only a handful of humans knew. Their journey was perilous. Any mistake could spell their doom. The Xenthari, though retreating for now, had not forgotten the humans. Their ships could be waiting for a chance to strike. The Concord entered the Xentharian system at the appointed time. The silence of space was deafening. No welcoming signals, no fleet in sight. Commander, are you sure we have the right coordinates? Kira asked. This place is... Don't worry, Aiden cut her off. The Xentharians know we're coming. They'll find us. Suddenly a flicker of light appeared on the scanners. Small, almost invisible. A single Xentharian warship emerged from the depths of the system, a relic of an ancient fleet. It was powerful but old. The ship's hull was scarred and the engines hummed with the sounds of a race, too proud to admit their need for help. Open a channel, Aiden ordered. The face that appeared on the screen was familiar, if only from old diplomatic meetings. The Xentharian commander, Aiden Kor, was a seasoned strategist, his features sharp and calculating. His eyes, however, betrayed a hint of weariness. You're late, Commander Cross, Aiden said. We had a few complications, Aiden replied, but we've come for your help. The Xenthari are not going to stop until they wipe us out. We need your fleet, your strength. Aiden's gaze remained cool, unreadable. And why should we help you? You betrayed us once before. Your kind turned your back on us when we needed it most. The weight of the history between humanity and the Xentharians hung in the air. The war had been long over, but the wounds had never healed. Humanity had made a choice, choosing to align with the Xenthari instead of the Xentharians during the last galactic conflict. That decision had cost them dearly. The Xentharians had never forgiven them. Aiden's, we're not the same people we were. We've learned from our mistakes. We're asking you to trust us one more time. Help us, and we'll help you rebuild. The Xenthari are the real enemy now. Not humanity, not you. Aiden was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke. I have my orders, and my people have their pride. But you're right, the Xenthari are coming for us all. He paused, the weight of his words sinking in. But remember, Commander Cross, trust is earned, not given. Aiden nodded. He knew what he was asking for. He knew the risks. You'll have my fleet, Aiden finally said, but you better make it count. As the Xentharian fleet joined theirs, Aiden could feel a shift. The Conqueror was no longer fighting alone. But the uneasy alliance hung in the air. Kira, watching the movements of the Xentharian ships, wasn't so sure. They're not all in yet, she muttered, her eyes scanning the distance. No, Aiden replied, but they will be. He paused, his mind racing. The real battle is yet to come. But just as hope began to stir, the warning systems aboard the Concord went off. Xenthari fleet detectors, Ensign Drake shouted. They're heading straight for us. It was too late. They had taken the bait, but the Xenthari were coming, and the fragile alliance would soon be tested in the fires of battle. Enjoying this chapter? Don't forget to like and subscribe to HY Genesis for more epic tales. Do you think Aiden made the right choice by trusting the Xentharians? Would you risk everything to form an alliance with a species that had once betrayed you? Leave your thoughts in the comments. The Xenthari were relentless. The moment they arrived in the system, their vast fleet descended like a storm. Their ships, sleek and ruthless, cut through the void with precision, swarming the once proud Xerathian warships with calculated brutality. The Alliance, fragile as it was being put to the test. The unity that had been forged in desperation was unraveling fast. Aiden stood in the command center, his hands clenched into fists, his heart pounding with a mixture of dread and determination. The tactical display in front of him was a chaotic blur of red and blue. The Xenthari were closing in, and their firepower was unmatched. "Sir, they're about to launch a full assault." Lieutenant Silva's voice cut through the tension. "The Xerathian fleet is still scattered. We need to coordinate." Aiden's mind raced. Time was running out. He couldn't afford to lose this alliance. Not when everything was on the line. He glanced over at Kiera, her face pale but resolute. She was already typing commands into the console, ready to organize the response. Her fingers flew over the keys, tapping out a rhythm of urgency. "We need to consolidate our forces," Aiden said, his voice sharp. "Push the Xerathians into position. I don't care how we do it. We fight or we die." Kira's gaze flicked to the view screen. "But if we move them too soon, they'll be sitting ducks. We need to buy more time for the Xerathians to regroup." Aiden's mind was already processing the options. There were no easy answers. "We don't have time," he said quietly, almost to himself. "If we let them take control of the battlefield now, we lose everything." The first volley of fire struck the Concorde shields with a deafening roar. Sparks flew from the systems, and the ship trembled under the force. The energy shields flickered, but held, just long enough to allow them to retaliate. "Return fire!" Aiden barked, his hands gripping the chair as another barrage of fire tore through the air. "We'll give them something to think about." The Concorde's guns roared to life, unleashing waves of energy bolts that crashed into the Xenthari warships. But the enemy was prepared. They had anticipated this move. They adapted faster than any human fleet ever could, their ships darting to the side with terrifying speed, dodging the attacks with ease. "Incoming fighters. They're trying to flank us." Ensign Drake's voice was filled with panic as the radar lit up with thousands of small enemy craft closing in. "Deploy our interceptors," Aiden ordered, "and someone get the Xerathians in formation now." The Concorde rocked again, this time harder, sending a shockwave through the bridge. Aiden's breath caught as a piece of the ceiling panel detached and crashed to the floor, narrowly missing his head. But there was no time for panic. "We need to fall back," Kira shouted, her voice barely audible over the din of alarms. "The Xerathians can't hold their ground any longer. We'll be destroyed if we stay." "No," Aiden growled, his jaw clenched. "We hold. Now." The weight of his words hung in the air like a threat. But it was a gamble. Every move they made, every second they spent fighting, was draining precious resources. Their shields were nearly gone. The Xerathians' ships were breaking apart at the edges of the battlefield. Yet Aiden couldn't bring himself to retreat, not when so much was at stake. In the distance, the dark silhouette of the Xenthari flagship loomed, massive and imposing, its weapons array pointing toward them. It was the heart of the enemy's fleet, the command center of their operations. If they could take it down, they would cripple the entire offensive. But it was a risk, a deadly one. "Sigh." Aiden met Kira's gaze, his eyes locked on hers as if communicating without words. She understood. They had no other choice. "Prepare the assault teams," Aiden ordered, his voice steady despite the storm brewing around them. "We're going for the flagship. Now." The crew sprang into action. Every move was precise, every moment counting. They had no reinforcements to rely on, no safety net. It was do or die. As they made their approach, the Xerathian ships seemed to fall into disarray. Some held their positions, but others had begun to retreat, unwilling to risk their lives further. The struggle for control wasn't just happening in space, It was happening within the Alliance itself. Aiden knew it would only take one Xerothian ship to abandon the fight for the others to follow, and if the Xerothians betrayed them now, everything would fall apart. The Concord's assault on the Xenthari flagship was chaotic. Waves of enemy fire pummeled the ship as they closed the distance. The bridge crew worked tirelessly, moving in a well-rehearsed rhythm, but there was no avoiding the overwhelming force of the enemy. It couldn't handle the sails, and they rattled as the ship slammed against the reef. Aiden felt his heart racing. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and his breath came in sharp gasps. But still, he couldn't allow himself to doubt. The Xerothians were starting to falter, but they weren't backing down entirely. Not yet. He had to give them hope. He had to give them reason to keep fighting. The moment came when the Concord's weapons locked onto the flagship's core. Aiden's finger hovered over the trigger. He was waiting for the signal to switch and kill the fleet. Could they do it? Would this risk pay off? Or would it be their last desperate attempt to hold on to what little they had? Faith cast another peek around the barracks' empty walls, but saw no one. "Firing," Kira said, her voice tight with fear. The blast hit. The flagship shuddered, the explosion ripping through its hull, sending shockwaves across the battlefield. For a moment, there was silence. And then, explosions erupted from every side as the Xenthari flagship buckled. The entire enemy fleet staggered, its coordination shattered. The Xerothian warships, inspired by the success, pushed forward, dealing crushing blows to the scattered Xenthari forces. More reflexes flew at his exemplars. Feeling the same rush, he pressed his force forward. Aiden's breath caught in his throat. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time the tide had shifted in their favor. Enjoying this chapter? Don't forget to like and subscribe to HFY Genesis for more epic tales. Was it the right decision to go after the flagship despite the risks? What would you have done in Aiden's position, with everything hanging by a thread? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Oncologists proved they could write random reviews, but were rude to staff. The battle was far from over, but for the first time it felt like victory might be within their grasp. The Xenthari flagship had been crippled, and their fleet was in disarray. Yet, as Aiden stood on the bridge of the Concorde, staring out into the darkness of space, he knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of something far more dangerous. The Xerothian fleet had rallied behind them, but there was a tension in the air. A heavy silence settled in the command center, broken only by the hum of the ship's engines and the soft click of consoles. Even though they had dealt a decisive blow to the Xenthari, it had come at a cost. The Concorde was battered, its shields barely holding, and the crew was exhausted. Aiden turned to Kira, who was standing at the tactical station, her face a mask of concentration. She was calculating, analyzing, trying to predict the Xenthari's next move. The worry lines on her face were more pronounced than ever. Aiden turned to Mira. "We can't keep this up much longer," she said. "We've taken a lot of damage. The Xerothians can't keep this up forever. We're on the edge of a precipice." Aiden nodded, his throat dry. He knew she was right. The Xenthari were relentless, and while their flagship was now a smoldering ruin, the war was far from over. The enemy was still a formidable force. "Then we need to push forward," Aiden said. "If we give them any more time to regroup, they'll find a way to retaliate." Kara's eyes met his. "You're talking about attacking their homeworld." Aiden's expression hardened. "We don't have any other choice. The Xenthari are a cancer, and if we don't cut them off at the root, this war will never end." The decision was made quickly, but that did nothing to ease the burden that weighed heavily on Aiden's shoulders. The entire course of the war depended on this next move. They had to strike the Xenthari homeworld with everything they had. It was a suicide mission. No one had ever attacked the heart of the Xenthari Empire and survived. As the conquered and the remaining Xerothian ships prepared for the long journey across enemy lines, Aiden found himself walking through the corridors of the ship, trying to focus, to clear his mind. His thoughts kept drifting back to the crew. His crew. The people who had followed him into battle. Those who had risked their lives time and time again. What would happen to them? Would they survive this final push, or were they walking into the jaws of death? His steps led him to the observation deck where he could see the stars stretching out before him, the black void of space swallowing the light. A distant part of him longed for a simpler life, one that didn't involve the weight of command, the bloodshed, the endless uncertainty. But there was no going back. Not now. Kiera joined him shortly, her footsteps light as she approached. "You're thinking too much," she said quietly. Aiden didn't look at her. "Someone has to." "Out." "We all do," Kiera replied, her voice soft, but with a hint of steel. "But thinking about it won't change the outcome. We either do this, or we don't." Aiden exhaled sharply, his mind racing. "What if we fail?" Kier placed a hand on his shoulder, a simple gesture of solidarity. "Then we die fighting for something worth dying for. But we don't fail, not when the stakes are this high." Aiden felt a flicker of hope, a brief moment of clarity. She was right. He couldn't afford to dwell on what might happen. They had a mission, and it had to be completed. There was no room for hesitation. As they moved closer to the Xenthari homeworld, the tension in the ship grew palpable. The crew worked in perfect harmony, each person performing their duties with deadly efficiency. The Zorathians, too, had mobilized, their ships lining up behind the Concorde, ready to strike. But even as the formation held, there was an underlying sense of unease. They were entering enemy territory, so heavily fortified that it would be nothing short of a miracle if they made it through alive. Kier and Aiden stood side by side in the command center, watching the view screen. The dark shape of the Xenthari planet loomed in the distance, its atmosphere crackling with the energy of the enemy's defenses. "We're almost there," Kiera said. "We need to go in fast before they can lock onto us." Aiden's eyes flicked to the tactical readouts. The Xenthari had already detected them. Their fleet was preparing to intercept. It was going to be a battle to the death, and no one was guaranteed to survive. "What do you think the odds are?" Aiden asked, though he knew there was no answer. Kiera didn't hesitate. "I don't think we'll make it." Aiden turned to her, surprised by her bluntness, but she wasn't finished. "But I don't think we're supposed to make it either. We're the distraction. The real battle will be the one that follows." Aiden's heart skipped a beat. The truth of her words hit him like a wave. The Concorde was the spearhead of this mission, the point of attack. But the real plan was what would come after their assault, what they hoped to accomplish with the chaos they would cause. The Xenthari fleet was large, but it was not invincible. They would have to fight, and fight hard. Every second would count, and they couldn't afford to fail. Not now, not when so much was at stake. As the battle began in earnest, the Concorde surged forward, breaking through the outer layers of the Xenthari defenses. The ship shuddered under the impact of enemy fire, but they pressed on, refusing to stop. Aiden could feel the crew's resolve, their will to survive driving them forward. The plan was working. The Xenthari were thrown into disarray. But that didn't mean the battle was won. The true test was yet to come. The darkness of space seemed to hold its breath as the final battle raged in full force. Aiden stood at the helm of the Concorde, the heart of the resistance now beating alongside him. The ship had taken considerable damage, its hull pockmarked with signs of the brutal assault, but it was still holding together. The crew was at the breaking point, exhausted, battered, but resolute. This was the moment. Outside, the Xenthari fleet formed an imposing wall of destruction, their ships like shadows in the void, each one a harbinger of death. The Xenthari had been ruthless, relentless. They had to be stopped. This time, There would be no turning back. Status report. Kara, standing at the tactical console, responded without hesitation. Shields are at 20%. We've lost 2 secondary systems, but the main reactor is holding. We have 1 shot at this, Aiden. 1 shot. 1 chance to end it all. The Concorde lurched as another barrage of enemy fire struck the shields. The hull groaned, but Aiden couldn't afford to flinch. He couldn't afford to show fear, not now. Not when so much depended on this final moment. Forward momentum, Aiden ordered, his tone firm. Push through the center. All engines to full power. As the crew scrambled to obey, the Concorde surged forward, cutting through the debris and enemy fire. The stars around them blurred into streaks of light, and the battlefield became a chaotic blur of explosions and flashing lights. Aiden's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the Xenthari ships react. They were preparing for their counterattack, ready to strike the Concorde from all sides. 2 of the ships survived and spread the word of their counterattack, ready to strike again. Aiden turned to Kira, who was working frantically at her console. "What's our opening?" he demanded. "Their defense grid is weakest around their command vessel," Kira said. "We've got a brief window. If we can break through their line, we can hit them with everything we have." Aiden's eyes narrowed. This was it, the key to the entire mission. Their last chance. "Prepare the weapons," he said, locking eyes with Kira. All of them. The moment felt like it stretched into eternity. Aiden's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and calculations as they drew closer to the heart of the Xenthari fleet. His crew, the Zorathians, they had all sacrificed so much to get here. Would it be enough? He adjusted the toddler. The Concorde rocked again, but it wasn't the worst hit. No, the worst was yet to come. As they closed the distance between them and the Xenthari command vessel, the space around them seemed to pulse with the energy of the enemy's wrath. The Xenthari were preparing their final assault. A few moments more, and they would have no more options. They would be crushed. Sergeant Johnson said. The bridge was silent except for the steady hum of the ship's systems and the distant echoes of the battlefield. Aiden's grip tightened on the command console, sweat beading on his forehead. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to make the right move, to ensure that they didn't fail now. "Now, Kira." Aiden's voice was sharp, cutting through the tension. "Fire." Pierre's hands moved with lightning speed, unleashing the ship's full arsenal. A barrage of energy blasts erupted from the Concorde's weapons, tearing through the void toward the Xenthari flagship. The explosion was deafening, even in the vacuum of space. A brilliant burst of light that illuminated the battlefield. For a moment, it seemed like the world held its breath. Aiden watched, waiting for the feedback, for the signs of victory or failure. Then the flagship's shields flickered and shattered. A cheer erupted from the crew as the mighty ship began to break apart, chunks of debris floating away as the core exploded in a violent cascade of energy. End of the panel. "We did it!" Kira shouted, but Aiden's smile was short-lived. As the Xenthari flagship disintegrated, something more terrifying began to happen. From the depths of the wreckage, a second, far larger vessel, hidden in plain sight, emerged from the shadows. It was a weapon unlike anything they had ever seen. A massive dreadnought, its sleek, deadly form dwarfing everything around it. "This isn't over," Aiden muttered, his mind racing. They were waiting for this. The dreadnought powered up, its massive guns charging with energy. Aiden knew that if this weapon fired, the Concorde would be vaporized in an instant. But they had no more time to react. The attack was already underway. Kira's eyes were wide as she looked at the readout, her hands shaking as she tried to plot an evasive maneuver. "Aiden, we can't outrun that thing. We have no time." Aiden turned to her, his jaw set with grim determination. "We don't need to outrun it. We need to destroy it." "What are you—" Kira began, but the words died on her lips as she saw the shift in his eyes. Aiden wasn't backing down. He had a plan. "Prepare the self-destruct sequence," he ordered. "We're going to take them down with us." Aiden's mind was razor-sharp as the countdown to the Conquered's self-destruction began. The ship's crew had already prepared themselves for this final sacrifice, but there was no time for sentimentality. There was only the mission. They would take the enemy down with them. As the countdown neared its end, Aiden locked eyes with Kiera one last time. There were no words left to say. They both knew what had to be done. 3, 2, 1. The Concorde erupted in a flash of light, a final act of defiance in the face of certain death. The explosion engulfed the dreadnought, the shockwave tearing through the void and consuming everything in its path. For a moment, all that remained was silence. Enjoying this chapter? Don't forget to like and subscribe to HFY Genesis for more epic tales. Was Aiden's decision to sacrifice the Conquered the right one? What would you have done in his place, knowing that the fate of the galaxy rested on this moment? Share your thoughts with us below. The light from distant stars bathed the remnants of the battlefield in a cold, silent glow. Where once there had been chaos and fire, now there was only the eerie stillness of space. The Concorde, their ship, their home, was gone. In its place, a trail of broken debris floated like the remnants of a lost dream. Aiden stood at the bridge, staring into the void. His eyes were empty, yet his mind was alive with questions. The weight of his choices, of the final sacrifice they had all made, pressed down on him, and he wasn't sure if he could bear it any longer. They had won. The dreadnought had been destroyed, and the Xenthari had been sent reeling. But at what cost? The end. Was it worth it? Aiden whispered, more to himself than anyone else. The words felt heavy, like stones sinking into the depths of his soul. Kira stepped up beside him, her face drawn and tired. The fatigue in her eyes mirrored his own. They had all given everything, and now, in the aftermath, there was no victory dance, no sense of accomplishment. Just silence. "It had to be done," Kira said softly. "We didn't have a choice, Aiden." But even as she spoke, Aiden couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there had been another way. There always was, wasn't there? Some path they could have taken that didn't require so much bloodshed. So many lives lost, including their own. "What now?" Aiden asked. "We've won the battle, but the war. What happens now?" Kira's hand rested gently on his shoulder, a reminder that they were still standing together. "Now, we rebuild. We give humanity a future." She paused, her eyes drifting toward the stars. "We give ourselves a future." But Aiden couldn't shake the image of the faces of those who had fallen. The crew, the allies, the innocent lives that had been caught in the crossfire. They were gone. "Is it enough?" Aiden muttered. "I don't know if it ever will be." "Sir?" As the crew worked in the background to salvage what they could from the Concorde's wreckage, Aiden found himself alone in the quiet corner of the bridge. His gaze was fixed on the star map in front of him, but his mind was far away. The sacrifices had been necessary, but did that make them right? How many lives had been lost for one final, desperate chance at peace? Could humanity truly heal from this? Or was the cost too great? The soft sound of footsteps brought him back to the present, and he turned to see Talia approaching. She had been with them since the beginning, a staunch ally, and now, more than ever, he could see the toll this war had taken on her as well. Her once bright eyes were dull with weariness, and her face carried the marks of grief. She had lost people too. She had seen the destruction firsthand. "Aiden," she said, her voice firm but compassionate, "you're not alone in this. I know it feels like it, but you don't have to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders." Aiden looked at her, unsure of what to say. He felt the weight of the galaxy on him, not just because of the war, but because of the people they had lost. The war had changed them all, made them into something they hadn't been before. Something darker, something harder. "I don't know how to keep going," Aiden confessed. "We've lost so much, and I don't know if we can rebuild, or if we even deserve to." Talia's eyes softened, and she took a step closer. "We're still here," she said quietly. "That's something, isn't it? We're still standing, and together we'll find a way to make it right." For a long time, no one spoke. The silence between them was a heavy, unspoken understanding, one that Aiden couldn't fully articulate, but felt in every inch of his body. He had never felt more lost, more uncertain of his place in the world. Was it enough that they had survived? Was it enough that they had stopped the destruction? Or did their survival come at the cost of their humanity? Aiden closed his eyes for a moment, trying to push away the weight of it all. When he opened them again, he looked out into the vastness of space. The stars were distant, unreachable, just like the answers he sought. But there was still hope. Maybe that was enough. For now. "You're right," Aiden said, his voice quiet but resolute. "We'll rebuild. We have to. For them." Talia gave a small, bittersweet smile. "For them," she echoed. In the days that followed, as they scoured the wreckage of the conquered and worked to rebuild, Aiden found a new sense of purpose. It wasn't the grand victory he had once imagined. It wasn't the peace he had hoped for. But it was something else, something more vital, more human. They had survived the unthinkable, and they had the chance to rebuild not just their world, but themselves. The crew, battered and bruised, rallied together. The ruins of the conquered became a symbol not of defeat, but of resilience. With every piece of debris they salvaged, they were stitching together a future. A new beginning, one built on the lessons they had learned and the sacrifices they had made. And as they set course for the new frontier, Aiden stood once more at the bridge, his heart heavy but filled with resolve. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: humanity had earned its place in the stars. The echoes of tomorrow were still calling to them, but now they were ready to answer. After everything Aiden and the crew have sacrificed, what do you think is the hardest part of their journey now? The emotional scars or the challenges of rebuilding? Share your thoughts in the comments. Feeling the weight of their journey? Don't forget to like and subscribe to HFY Genesis for more epic tales of resilience, sacrifice, and the human spirit.